Alright, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to start off by giving all praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakah Kodash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone. Real well, peace and salutations unto the hopeful elect. Alright, this video will be entitled, If Moses left the truth, okay, he would not be in the volume of the book, okay? Because Yahweh Shai is in the volume of the book, and this guy, General Yahayaman, as the elder in South Carolina, Elder Matzakba, okay, did a video. These guys, they way off, bugged out. Okay, the name of this video was Response Isupk, Moses left the truth, bugged out, damnable heresies. That's what it is. Alright. First they were saying John the Baptist left the truth, now Moses, a servant of the Lord. Alright, I'm not even gonna play the video. He was talking about all this, that, and how, Satan and the archangel is fighting over the body in Jude 1 verse 9. And that have nothing to do with Moses being unfaithful, okay, just contrary, very contrary. Or Moses set the standard, okay, the Lord gave him, okay, the statutes, the laws, for the people of Israel, okay, and then he had the prophets, so on, to Yahweh Shai, and these guys, they're not speaking according to the law. Who the Lord gave the law to? Moses, okay, and to the testimony with the prophets. You're speaking against a prophet, Moses, a faithful servant to the Lord. Moses never forsake the Lord. Alright, okay, and he stood faithful to the end, okay, and the Spirit of the Lord still was with him. In Deuteronomy 34. Alright, okay, his natural force wasn't obeyed, his strength, his body, although he was in age, it still was strong, okay? It's just that the disobedience he did, not glorifying the Lord, he wasn't allowed to go in the promised land, but he still led Israel to the promised land, so, hey, if they don't speak according to the law and to the testimony, there's no light in them. Okay, and as you see here, he was drinking alcohol. It's supposed to be sober when you're speaking the word, literally. The prophets don't drink, when they preaching the word, that off, alright, so it's certainly no light in these guys, just alcohol in this man's head, alright, okay. So first I just want to start off with this precept here. This is 2 Timothy 3 and verse 13. This had come to mind when I watched the video. Alright, but evil men and seducers, they are seducers, in wickedness. Alright, shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived, and that's very worse. Alright, just waxing worse and worse. Now saying Moses, alright, okay, fell out of the faith, left the Yahweh, alright, okay, but continue thou in the things which thou hast learned and hast been assured of knowing of whom thou hast learned them. Continue in the apostles' doctrine. Find the 100% truth. That's all we're telling you. Find the 100% truth. And this truth is not for everybody. Alright, only to the chosen. Only for the chosen, the election. Alright. So these guys, this guy, he literally out of his head. Okay. See him drinking there. Alright. This is 1 John. Right here, this is 1 John 4 and verse 1, testing the spirits. I'll jump down to verse 6. It says, Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, whether they be of power, because many false prophets are gone out of the world, and Isupk was a bunch of false prophets, certainly. Okay, speaking contrary to the doctrine, not the volume of the book, of Yahushai. Alright? Okay? Verse 6 it says, we are power, and we don't even have to try them. That's the thing, they off just by the words. Alright? Verse 6 it says, we are of power, okay, the 100% truth. Alright, to the scriptures. Okay, the scriptures didn't say that Moses forsake, the Lord, because the Lord continued to mention him, in the New Testament, which I'll read, and still call him Moses his servant after, he died, right? Okay, just real nonsense, way. He that knoweth power heareth us, he that is not of power heareth not us. Hereby know we the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. This is completely the spirit of error. Okay, talking that nonsense. Right? They certainly they don't understand. Okay? Now let me just bring this is Hebrews. Talking about the volume of the book, Hebrews 10. Matter of fact, I'll just actually slack here. This is Hebrews 10 and verse 7. It says, then said I, lo, I come in the volume of the book. Okay, the rule, the book, the words of the book. Alright? Which the law, the Torah, was given to Moses, to the people. Alright? Moses set that standard. Okay, then, to the prophets prophesying to Israel, okay, to Yahushai, right? And Yahushai is in the volume of the book, they taken away of the book, okay? The book, it is written of me to do thy will. Alright, so they come in an off volume, okay, completely way off. Alright, okay, and this was from, a quote from Psalms 40 and 7, talking about the same thing coming in the volume of the book, okay, which is King David, which was written by Moses, in the reincarnation. Alright, okay, and just contrary, off. Now I had to mark these guys, Alright, so let me just read this, Matthew 17, talking about the transfiguration, and I think I'll read from verse 3. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elijah, right? Elijah the prophet. Okay, but let me read that over. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses, okay, and Elijah, talking with him. Then answered Peter and said unto Yahushua, Lord, it is good for us to be here. It's like, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Alright? But the point is, okay, Moses is still mentioned, okay, because why? He was a man of the Lord. Okay? He led the children of Israel. Okay, still he didn't forsook the Lord, that's complete error and madness. Alright? Okay? And they come in a wrong volume, completely wrong volume. Alright? Okay? This is Romans chapter 16 and verse 17. Okay, now I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions. This is completely against the word. Alright, and offenses. Okay, a big offense. Contrary to the doctrine which ye have learned, and avoid them. If you have the 100% truth, you should be avoiding these guys. Okay, because they literally did not write in their head. Okay, because if you could say that, you could say whatever you want about the Bible, the scriptures. Alright, You know, so don't take heed to these guys. All right, okay. This is Second Timothy. Start here. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 3. If any man teach otherwise and consent not to the wholesome words, okay, and does not consent into the wholesome words, Moses, left the truth. Okay, he didn't left it. He stayed faithful to the end. Clearly these guys not reading these Bibles, all right. Even the words of our Lord Yahushua Mashiach, and to the doctrine which is according to godliness, all right, life. And they lead in a path of death, all right. And not everybody again could find this is a straight path, okay. So you're blessed if you have this truth, all right. Verse 4 says, he is proud. Certainly this guy is proud, knowing nothing, but dothing about questions and strifes of words, whereof cometh envy, strife, railings, evil summerings. Alright? And that's what it is, alright? Complete confusion. Verse 5, perverse disputings of men of corrupt minds, and destitute of the truth, supposing that gain is godliness. From such withdraw thyself. This is what it is. You're just gonna corrupt your mind and lead you to a path of destruction. Alright, let me just look up that word destitute. Okay.
Destitute.
Extremely poor and lacking the means to provide for one's self. Okay, they don't have the scriptures, the wisdom, the knowledge, the understanding. Okay, they're extremely poor. Okay, in this knowledge, all right, in the faith. This is what it is here. They don't even care to study this self, to study slack rough. Let me just bring up that scripture. This is slack here. This is 2 Timothy 2 and verse. I'll read from 14. Of these things put them in remembrance, charging them before the Lord that they strive not about words to no profit, but to the subverting of the hearers, and they subverting, wrongly. Alright, seducing you wrongly, Okay. Subvert is the connect you, join you, to the truth, alright? This is what we're doing. Alright, but in the 100% truth. Verse 15, it says, study to show thyself approved. He just saying what he want. He don't even care, what he's saying. Not choosing his words wisely. Alright. Study to show thyself approved unto power. Certainly in doing that. A workman, matter of fact, just, alright, lying and about a man of power. Alright, Moses. Okay. Disproving a man of power. Man of Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, alright. A workman that needeth not to be ashamed. Okay, they don't have no shame. That's the thing. This guy, he don't have no shame. For him to say this, and that's why these guys, they need judgment. Okay. Rightly dividing the word of truth. And they're not rightly dividing the word of truth at all. Alright, verse 16. But shun profane and vain babblings. He going on to say shit and this and that our pleasure thing. He in pleasure right now, drinking that yayan. Alright, drinking that yayan. Alright. It says, but shun profane and vain babblings, for they will increase unto more ungodliness. Certainly, what you're speaking there is ungodliness. Alright, I want to go in the EMP of this. Alright, study and do your best to present yourself to power approved. Okay, these guys certainly not doing that. A workman tested by trial, okay, studying, who has no reason to be ashamed, accurately handling and skillfully teaching the word of truth. Okay, and this is not doing the completely off accuracy of, of teaching the truth. Okay, this is what it is here. So don't listen to these guys. All right, they need judgment. Okay, complete damnable heresies. Okay, so Lord's willing, this video was edifying unto the hopeful elect. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Rakah Kodash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone Real Well. Peace and salutations unto the hopeful elect. Wa Abad Babal and Shalom.